Going to be looking at the book of Daniel, first chapter today. Going to look at Daniel's example. The church was having a picnic, and they had gone to a little park, and it was a beautiful little scenery. And the preacher, he decided to take a little short walk, and he walked and saw this really nice little old bridge. And he walked out on the bridge, and it was going over a small stream. It was one of those walking bridges. And just as he got in the middle of the bridge, he took a sneezing fit. And in the middle of his sneezing fit, his false teeth fell out and fell down in the water. And he didn't know what in the world he was going to do, so he walked off the bridge and he sat down by the bank, and he was fixing to take his shoes off and wade on in and try to get them out. But there was a sweet, dear little old lady who was also there and had seen everything that was going on. And she said, "Hold on just a minute, I think we can take care of that." And so she took a piece of yarn that she had there, her knitting yarn, and she tied it to the end of a leg of chicken. And she threw the chicken into the lake, and sure enough, those false teeth, they grabbed at that chicken. And she pulled it up, and she gave it to the preacher, and she said, "It never fails, does it? Preachers just love fried chicken." Daniel's example. Recently, we know that there has been some renewed interest in the book of Daniel. And, of course, the thing is, the interest of many is mainly in the miraculous and the magical and the mystical. That is, the prophetic aspects of the book of Daniel. And that is that same part that was testified to by Jesus, because that's the part of the book that he quoted. In Matthew chapter 24, verses 15 through 16, Jesus himself, when he was prophesying about the coming destruction of Jerusalem and the temple there by the Romans, which was going to take place in about 40 years, in 70 AD. And here's what Jesus said: "So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation, spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." However, as intriguing as the prophetic section of Daniel may be, the practical aspects of faith, which we find in the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel, are also very, very important, and especially for our younger readers, because of Daniel's example, even as a teenager. Now, it's true that Daniel's age isn't given, but there are a lot of hints in there. First of all, we find that Daniel was still alive 70 years later during the reign of Cyrus the Persian, which was several years after the destruction of Babylon, which took place in October of 539 BC, some 66 years after Daniel and his friends had been taken captive into Babylon. And since the term young men used in Daniel chapter 1 verse 17 usually refers to young men between the ages of 13 and 30, we can understand that he must have been young. And added to that is the fact that they were going back to school. Teenagers go back to school. Older folk don't usually go back to school. But anyway, it's more than highly likely that he was in his older teens, and so were the others with him. And remember now, how old was Joseph when he was sold as a captive slave in Egypt? He was 17 years old. I suspect that that's probably about the age of Daniel as well. And that would make him about 87 when Cyrus was reigning. A nice old age for that time of year, that type of history. So, in the light of all this, one could liken the Babylonian education as going away to college today. Going away to college. Now, even though the first part of Daniel specifically applies to young people, his example is for all of us to emulate. In other words, it has lessons in faith for all of us. Now, Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem 3 times before destroying the temple there. He came against it in 605, he came against it in 597, and he came again in 586 when he completely destroyed the temple. When he came against them in 597 the second time, when he took captives again, of course the first time he took captives, Daniel and his friends, I always remember them by Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but they've got other names too as well. But anyway, he and his friends were taken captive the very first time in 605 when they took the cream of the crop. They took those young men who were wise and smart and who were a part of the nobility and royalty. Those were the ones that they took. Now, in 580 or 597, they took Ezekiel, the one that we've got another book by. Now, Jeremiah was about to be taken away in the 3rd time, but they let him go. Nebuzaradan realized who he was, and he let him go. They told him to stay there. Now, of course, the thing about it was, poor Jeremiah, listen, he went through one problem after another problem after another. You think your life is a soap opera? You think your life has one problem after another? Jeremiah, he was thrown in jail, he was starved to death, he was put in a cistern. All kinds of things kept happening to him. Nobody liked him, everybody hated him, but he didn't go eat any worms. And we find that Jeremiah was being taken too. And when he noticed, when Nebuzaradan noticed who it was, he let him go. And he told him he could stay in the land. But of course, that was short-lived, because it wasn't very long before the next thing you know, there was a plot, and they killed the governor. And when they killed the governor, Gedaliah, they felt that they needed to run off to Egypt, the soldiers, even the ones who were not guilty in the plot. They thought that they need to get away because, sure enough, they were afraid of Nebuchadnezzar. And guess what? They kidnapped Jeremiah and they took him to Egypt with them. And that's the last we hear about Jeremiah. Now, when Nebuchadnezzar took Daniel and friends in that first wave, as we said, he only took the cream of the crop. And so the book of Daniel begins when? In 605 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem the first time and took away the finest men that Judah had to offer. Immediately after their arrival in college town Babylon, they were enrolled in school. However, Daniel and his 3 friends didn't like the cafeteria food. And so he asked the master of arms if they could just eat tofu. Well, maybe not tofu, maybe vegetables and water. Vegetables and water. And that's all they wanted to eat. So let's read about the college adventures of these 4 young Jewish men. Beginning with verse 8 in Daniel 1. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel, But the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men of your age? The king would then have my head because of you. And Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that's the other name of Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them in, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. And that's when he went to Persia. In this passage, we see Daniel's example. His example especially to young college students and high school students and to all of us. And we see his example. His example was to remain holy at all cost, to remain faithful at all cost. And the first fact that pops up in this passage is about Daniel's resolve. His resolve is a matter of holiness. Of holiness. There's an overlooked expression, I should say overworked expression, that's supposed to guide people who move along into foreign countries or into different cultures. And the expression is, when in Rome, do as the Romans. Now Daniel and his friends, they must not have learned that particular little jingle, that lesson, because right away they were at variance with the Babylonian culture. They wanted to remain holy. They didn't give in to cultural pressure, and they didn't give in to peer pressure. They didn't want to be like everyone else. They didn't want to eat in the college cafeteria like everyone else. Now, at first glance, someone might think that they were vegans. That is the modern in-word for vegetarians, isn't it? Vegans. One might think they were, but they really weren't. That's not what the question was all about. In the real understanding of this situation, we look to verse 8, where it says, here's what it was about. Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. He knew that royal food would defile him. How would it defile him? What was it about the food at the king's table that would cause these young men to defile themselves? Well, there's several factors that would cause that defilement. Usually this meat that they ate was sacrificed to idols. Number one thing against it. Secondly, it didn't have all the blood drained out, and it wasn't kosher. They didn't do it right. That was a problem. Third, there was too much untrimmed fat on it. And the Jews were pretty particular about how much fat you trimmed off. And it was often meat that was unclean, meat from forbidden animals, such as pigs and shellfish. So to be sure that they didn't eat the forbidden meat, they just wanted vegetables and nothing else. And what about water instead of wine? Didn't the Jews drink wine? Why, sure they did. Today, they often warn about what? About drinking water in foreign countries, and they recommend you to drink wine and other things of this nature when you go there. But instead, with them, they were recommended to drink the wine, and they didn't do it. Pollution wasn't that big of a problem back then as it is now. However, the real problem here was that of animal blood. You see, animal blood was often used by the pagans in the fermentation process. And not only this, but they often mixed the animal blood in with the wine. And you can't drink blood. It was forbidden by the Jews. The Maasai, warriors in Africa, they mix blood in with their milk and drink it. And so that was a part of the way it was. Now, Daniel and his friends didn't want to defile themselves, so they chose just to eat vegetables and to drink only water. Another problem was that those meals often turned into drunken parties, like it did with King Ahasuerus, when his turned into a drunken party, and he wanted his wife to come out so he could show her off and how beautiful she was. And she said, I don't want to go in there with all those drunks. And the drunks, the nobles, got mad. And so they convinced the king that he needed to get rid of Vashti and get somebody else. Well, of course, when he got somebody else, Esther appeared on the scene. But the point is that, what was it? A drunken party. And what happened in the New Testament? There was another drunken party. This one was held by Herod. What happened there? Got drunk again. What'd Herod do? Said something stupid. He said, listen, when his stepdaughter danced for him, and he thought it was great and fabulous. And he said, hey, I'll give you anything you want, up to half the kingdom. She said, I'll take the head of John the Baptist. Why? Because of another drunken party. That was the case oftentimes with the young men. You see, the Jews were allowed to drink wine, but they were cautioned against getting drunk. So Daniel and his friends just stayed away from the frat parties, which, by the way, is good advice for all of you college students. Stay away from the frat parties. They only get you in trouble. They only get you in trouble. So to keep themselves holy, they pleaded for a special dispensation, allowing them to eat just vegetables and drink just water. However, their faculty advisor was still leery about that diet. And so he reluctantly agreed to a test. Trial period. You know, today, when you turn on the television or when you pick up the newspaper, you're always reading about free trial offers. People want us to buy their products, so they'll send us the product and let us try it for 30 days. And if we're not satisfied, we can send it back to them, and they'll send us the money back. Sometimes it costs more to send the product back than it does the money you're going to get back, because it's going to cost you in the mail anyway. We have to pay the return postage. The free trial ends up not being free. Well, Daniel was confident that his diet would produce at least as good a results as the king's diet. So Daniel convinced his faculty advisor, his guard, that his diet wouldn't cause any negative effects. So Daniel and his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, again better known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were given a 10-day trial period. 10 days. Where they ate nothing but vegetables and drank nothing but water. Now, we don't know what brand of water they drank. Was it Sam's Club or Nestle's or whatever it was, or just plain spring water? But they drank water for 10 days. And then came the assessment. The faculty advisor took one look at them and compared them to the other fraternity brothers who had been partying on wine and fast food. You know, they'd been eating Big Macs and pizzas and French fries and all of that kind of stuff. Typical. And, you know, they ate all that stuff in between guzzling six-packs. So we find that, hey, no wonder they looked better. They didn't come in with a hangover. They looked better. They looked healthier and better nourished than any of the other college kids who'd been eating from the King's cafeteria, who'd been down there eating at the all-you-can-eat buffet and all-you-can-drink buffet. No wonder they look better. No wonder they look better. And that's one of the advantages of going to a Christian university or college. You don't have to worry about frat parties. You don't have to worry about the temptation to give in to all the wicked, evil things that are going on. The things that seem to be fun, but end up leading to bad grades. That end up leading to making stupid decisions. Drunks have the best excuse, and they give them. I can't help it, I was drunk at the time. Good excuse. Bad excuse. Don't get drunk in the first place. So, the assessment came and they looked good. And so they were allowed to eat their own diet for the next 2 years of college. And after 2 years, they had to pass the finals. Some graduates have to take written exams. However, some have to take oral exams. And that's the kind that our graduates, Daniel and friends, had to take. And guess what? It was the dean of the college himself who gave them their orals. It was none other than King Nebuchadnezzar, who came and gave them their orals. He asked the questions that they had to answer. He wanted to know if they passed or failed. And if they passed, they were given lucrative government jobs. Daniel and his associates not only outshone their fellow students, they displayed 10 times as much wisdom and understanding as all of the others who were already in the service of the government. Of course, that isn't hard to do in some governments. All of them, all the wise men of the kingdom, they were 10 times wiser. And here the wise men of the kingdom are described as magicians and enchanters. In the NIV and the King James, it calls them magicians and astrologers. See, these people are the ones who had direct divine connections. So they had divine wisdom, and they were considered to be the wisest of all. For Daniel, at least, this turned out to be a permanent job, which lasted some 70-odd years until Babylon was defeated and absorbed by the Medo-Persian Empire, and later simply became the Persian Empire. We don't know exactly when Daniel died, but we know that it was after Cyrus had taken over. So he lived in Persia for a while too. That's the story. Let's look at some lessons. Some lessons. And there are some negative lessons here, we might say. First, you can't use Daniel to write a book on dieting. The first half of Daniel is not a guideline to a healthy diet, nor is the whole Old Testament. We're New Testament Christians. We don't have to follow dietary laws. However, we're cautioned not to be gluttons. Plain and simple. Don't be gluttons. Second, Daniel is not a book that teaches us how to succeed in a capitalistic society. And most of all, it is not a book that teaches us how to control God or how to control our earthly situations. Instead, understand this. It is a book of faith. It's about men's examples, and especially the example of one man, Daniel, who not only believed in God, but he also lived his faith. He lived his faith. Daniel did not use his faith to control life's situations. Oh, listen. How many books do you pick up, and what are they about? Here's how you can control your life situations. And you can do it by faith in God. No, that's not what Scripture is about. It's about being faithful to God and trusting in Him no matter what goes on in your life. Daniel didn't use his faith to control life situations. Instead, Daniel's faith controlled him in all of life's situations. And I need to repeat that 4 times at least. Daniel's faith controlled him in all of life's situations. Daniel's faith controlled him in all of life's situations. Daniel's faith controlled him in all of life's situations. I think at least I've got it maybe. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. It's about letting God be God and us trusting in Him. The question for us is, do we try to control life situations, or do we let our faith in Jesus control us in life's situations? Hopefully it's the latter, that we let our faith in Jesus control us in all of life's situations. I'm not going to repeat that 4 times. Question. Do you know Jesus? Is your faith in Him? And is that faith controlling you? Does that faith control your decisions? Does that faith keep you out of all the misery that you could get into? It will, but it's not a how-to. But it will. Where's your faith? Good question. Where's your faith? You believe in Christ? Have you trusted Him as your Lord and Savior? Have you made that decision? We're going to have an invitation hymn this morning, and it's time for you to make a decision. If I'm outside of Christ, do I want to follow Him and be baptized into Him and live for Him? And let Him control life's situations. And let my faith shine through. We're going to stand and have that invitation, and whatever you need to make a decision about, now's the time to do it.